Most interesting of all is the evidence that such worship was coveted at Qumran. According to 1 QSA Samuel 2:8-9, the rules for the congregation of the last days would have to be strict, for the angels of holiness are with their congregation. But the implication of other references is that these rules were already in operation, indicating that the Qumran community saw itself as a priestly community whose holiness was defined by the presence of the angels. So explicitly in 1 QH 3:21-22, thou hast cleansed a perverse spirit of great sin, that it may enter into community with the congregation of the sons of heaven. More to the immediate point, in 1 QSB 4:25-26, one of the blessings of the priest is, may you be an angel of the presence in the abode of holiness to the glory of the God host. May you attend upon the services in the temple of the kingdom and decree destiny in company with the angels of the presence. Most interesting of all are the recently published, complete but often fragmentary text of the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, which contains songs of praise to be offered to God by angels in the heavenly temple during the first 13 Sabbaths of the year, and which is clear enough since the songs presumably belong to the community's liturgy, that the community itself, or at least its priests, joined with the angels in reciting these songs of heavenly worship. However, we are to understand the phrase, the worship of angels. It is clear that such was not normative in Pharisaic Judaism as we know it, which was by all accounts the Judaism practiced by the vast majority of the Jewish community at the time of Paul. Once again, this phrase makes it clear that the Colossian philosophy against which Paul was battling was a sectarian Judaism that had incorporated a great deal of mysticism, based upon visions, perhaps also borrowing aspects of the pagan mystery religions. Their teaching and worship was thus a far cry from the scriptures, Tanakh, that undergirded Paul's message. And once again, Paul points out that such arrogant and false humility, characterized by self-abasement, while having the appearance of lofty ideals, had failed to see that Yeshua is the all-important Messiah of God, who gives life and sustenance to congregations that belong to him. If you have died with the Messiah to the elementary principles of the world, why, as if you were living in the world, do you submit yourself to decrees such as do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, which all refer to things destined to perish with use, in accordance with the commandments and teachings of men? These are matters which have, to be sure, the appearance of wisdom in self-made religion and self-abasement and severe treatment of the body, but are of no value against fleshly indulgence. In the final paragraph, Paul returns to the fact that the Colossian philosophy has asceticism at its core, and that such deprecation of the body has not real value when it comes to true holiness. Now he describes this asceticism as the severe treatment of the body, letting us know that it went far beyond fasting. He even incorporates what must have been the standard mantra of the sect: do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. To what does this refer? The first verb, hapto, to translate handle by the NASB, means to have close contact, or even to have intimate contact. It could just as well be translated touch. The same verb is used by Paul in 1 Corinthians 7:1 to denote sexual relationships. Now concerning the things about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Is it possible then that abstinence from sexual relation was characteristic of this sect on the premise that such relations lowered one's purity? Do not taste could well refer to eating what would normally be allowed within the Torah regulations, clean foods, but which were prohibited by the additional rules of the sect. It is very possible that in their extreme asceticism, foods that were handled by Gentiles, or even found in their presence, may have been rendered unfit for consumption. Thus, do not taste more than likely carries with it extreme measures of food separation that were far in excess of what the Torah itself required. Do not touch is a close synonym of the early hapto, but may have the added sense of grasp with the hand, to lay hold of something. This may relate specifically to the whole issue of purities and the attempt of those in the Colossian sect to remain separate from those outside of their group in order to attain a higher level of ritual purity. This was also a concern of the Qumran sect, very much so. But whatever is precisely meant by these three negatives, Paul makes it clear that these prohibitions are not derived from the commandments of God, for he adds, in accordance with the commandment and teaching of men. Here is yet another clear indication that what Paul is combating is not the observance of Torah commandments as given by God through the hand of Moses, but the aesthetic teachings of a particular Jewish sect, teachings which were, after all, self-made religion. As such, this man-made religion, while it may have appeared as very esoteric and lofty, and perhaps is all attaining to far greater holiness than most Jewish communities, actually was impotent to give its members any real strength against fleshly indulgence. It had the outward form of appearance of holiness, but inwardly contained no real power against sin.
Sounds like nuns.
Well, Catholicism bought into some of this. Summary. Number one, Paul had a positive, not a negative view of Torah. For Paul, the Torah was good, not bad. 2. Paul considered the Torah to be the living, inspired Word of God. According to 2 Timothy 3:16, the Torah is therefore profitable for righteous living. 3. With these facts in mind, if we interpret Colossians 2 in such a way as to have Paul instructing Colossians to disregard the Torah, we have made Paul self-contradictory and even worse, a false teacher. 4. But when we study the Colossians 2 in its context, we discover that Paul is not combating the observance of Torah commandments, but the infiltration of a philosophy based upon the teaching of men and not on the Word of God. This Colossian philosophy, which Paul calls hollow and deceptive, promised its members greater experiences of religious piety and worship. 6. While it is impossible to precisely define what this Colossian philosophy was, or the group or teacher that had formulated it, Paul does give us a number of things that characterize this errant teaching. It offered a higher, more complete form of knowledge and wisdom. It required an ascetic life which involved severe self-abasement, that is, adherence to many additional laws and restrictions and mystical forms of worship. C. Those who taught the Colossian philosophy judged outsiders as having no real reconciliation to God. D. Entrance into the sect was through conversion for Gentiles, circumcision, and adherence to the strict rules pertaining to kosher laws, purity laws, observance of the appointed times, and perhaps abstinence from sexual relations at certain times. These stringent measures were man-made, not anything found in the Torah itself, but were taught as the means by which a person could attain to the mysteries of God, and thus to a heightened level of holiness. F. The sect may have considered that through mystical experience brought on by extreme self-abasement, that is fasting, deprivation of the body, they were actually able to worship with the angels in the heavenly realm. Paul clearly, you got to understand what they're doing here. The angels don't have relations, so you stop having relations. Angels don't eat certain things. Angels only eat manna. You stop eating and fast so that you can then enter into the same type of worship the angels are doing. You understand what I'm saying now? Okay. 7. Paul clearly defines the Colossian philosophy as a deceptive argument, as the religion of men and not of God, as offering no real value to the Colossian believers. In using these descriptors, he surely cannot be talking about the Torah given to Moses on Sinai. When Paul tells the Colossians not to let anyone judge them in respect to food or drink or a new moon, a festival, or a Sabbath day, he's instructing them not to be concerned that the false teachers judge them as estranged from God because they are not part of their particular sect. Rather, the Colossians should continue in the halakha they received from Paul, obeying the commandments of the Torah and remembering how the appointed times are a revelation of the good things that are coming, particularly the return of Yeshua to reconcile all things. 9. Most egregious in the false teaching of the Colossian philosophy was the lowering of Yeshua to the position of one among many equals in the heavenly entourage. Paul seeks to correct this errant teaching by emphasizing throughout the epistle that Yeshua has the unique and exalted position as the Son of God. For in him the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. Yeshua is the creator and sustainer of the universe, and he is the head of the ecclesia which derives its life from him. Conclusion. Far from being a teaching of Paul that the Torah and its commandments had been set aside, the epistle of Colossians reinforces the need to walk in Yeshua by the same faith to which he received, a faith characterized by obedience to God's commandments. What Paul was combating in this epistle is not teachers who were encouraging the Colossians to keep Torah, but false teachers who were trying to draw the Colossians into their own man-made religion, a religion that diminished the unique person and work of Yeshua and elevated an outward asceticism which without having the power for true holiness. All right. All right. Questions, comments?
Who is Tim?
Hey.
I have no idea.
Some guy.
He's a pastor in Tacoma who...
I'm not really sure.
Oh, okay. I do know him. His name's so familiar.
Oh, hold on. It's coming back to me now.
Okay. Yeah, he's in Tacoma. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, the whole Roman Church bought into that.
Yes. This is where you get the celibacy of the priesthood.
Yeah.
As this kind of stuff moves into Gentile. See, here's what they thought. They thought, okay, the angels, we were told in the Torah, the angels eat manna, it's angel food. So that's the only kind of food they would eat is this angel food. Not dogs.
Angel food cake?
Angel food cake. It's angel food cake. Yeah.
Yeah.
Devil food cake.
that makes
I
sense.
can live on that.
So
There's a lot of the cakes that make people go, what is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not for the same reason though.
Okay.
that's for different reasons, Corey, but, not because it's heavenly. But so they're eating the manna, and the angels don't marry or give in marriage, so they're not having relations. So they said, well, and so the angel, if you want to enter into this angelic worship, you have to also fast and then abstain from sexuality, and then you could. They were coming up in the intertestamental literature with ways of entering into angelic worship. That you could. The Song of the Sabbath Sacrifice is a section of the Qumran literature, which is this idea that this is how the angels worshipped. They were coming up with what they thought were ways that the angels worshipped. So we should kind of we can do the same thing they're doing. So and then you get this. They have a in the intertestamental literature as well. By the way, you have this notion that, and it doesn't say it in the Torah, although you can understand how they got to it. It doesn't say that the angels were present on Mount Sinai, okay, with the giving of the Torah. But you have to understand, if God is who He is, being this man that is the captain of the army, anywhere that God goes, then the army goes with Him, the angelic army. So you extrapolate and say, okay, God comes down on Mount Sinai, therefore angels were down there with Him as well, because He's always got an entourage, a detail of kind of a guard.
Does it say that anywhere in the Bible?
What?
That God always has what you just said.
By extrapolation, you can get there. Here's what I'm saying. Let me show you what I'm saying. Read for us, Linda. Read for us Joshua chapter 5.
Another thing is that, like, if the president shows up, you get a story. The president was there, but it took 16 limousines to get him there.
Right.
There's an entourage.
Does it need angels to protect them?
Interesting, just on that note, I'm reading the book of Jashar right now.
Yeah.
And Jashar suggests that very thing, that when he's on Mount Sinai getting the Torah, that the angels and the army of angels are all around him presenting the Ten Commandments to him.
So yeah, so
really
read. Here's where you get this idea, though, in the text.
Joshua what?
It's the book of Joshua and the book of Judges, or one other book mentions Yashar, which is a history of Israel's battles.
Oh.
So Joshua 5, I think it's
It's in Joshua, it's in 2 Samuel.
There we go. Look at verse 13, I think it is, Joshua 5:13.
Okay, so when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said, "Are you for us or our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so.
Right, and so what you find is this man is the captain of the army of hosts of God. He has a drawn sword, which puts him, we triangulate and say, look, this drawn sword, the angel of the Lord has a drawn sword, this man has a drawn sword. The angel of the Lord says to Moses, you got to take off your shoes for you're on holy ground. This man says you got to take off your shoes for you're on holy ground. So when you do all the cross-referencing, you realize that this man, who is the captain of the army of the host of God, is the angel of the Lord who has a drawn sword. And what we find out is that in 2 Kings and other texts, that this angel of the Lord, who is also this man who has who's the captain of the army of the host, he has an angelic army around him. And so that's how they got the idea that if God comes down, He's not coming down alone. He's got an army with Him. He says as much. In fact, this is where we have the prophet says, "I see the chariots of fire on the mountains." Right, this is Merkavah chariots. And what happens? Elisha, the chariot comes down. This chariot comes out of heaven, swoops him up. Right. Okay, where does this chariot come from? It's God's chariot. And by the way, that's the chariot that's following the children of Israel in the wilderness by fire by day and fire by night. And God, we're told, rides on the clouds. That's the chariots up there. It's the clouds. The clouds hide this chariot, so to speak, that moves around. This is the Merkavah imagery that we get both in the Hebrew Scriptures and that really expanded in the intertestamental literature. Okay, so here to answer your question is at very key places in the Gospels, Yeshua comes down. Luke, we have the heavenly hosts are there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
After the temptation.
After the temptation, Matthew 4, it says angels came and ministered to him. Mm-hmm. There's two angels in the tomb after he resurrects. Yeshua himself says to Pilate, if I wanted to, I could call a legion of angels and they'd come here in a heartbeat. He's always making reference to the fact that we always see them kind of coming down, and they're there. They're not. We don't always see them. They're not always like on the page, but every now and then the text will say, and oh, by the way, the angels were there. Oh, by the way, the angels were there. Oh, by the way, the angels were there.
Well,
So there's this.
to Abraham when he talked to
Right.
Abraham and to Sodom and
Exactly.
Gomorrah.
So it's not that God needs a detail. It's imagery of if you are a warrior general and leading an army, you would never go anywhere in the thinking of the ancient Near East without a protective detail. Not that you need it, not that he needs protection, but that's just the way it would go. You always have a protective detail with you. You know, so it's you're right that God doesn't need protecting, but it's a way of saying because of who he is, he always has them around him. So you know, they're at his disposal and at his beck and call to go where he needs to go, do what he needs to do. He can dispatch them at any time, and you know they are flames of fire unless they veil themselves. And, you know, it's so fascinating imagery. So the point is this: that if God comes down on Mount Sinai, then the angels must have been there because they would have come down with him. Anytime that we have the angel, see, like she said, Genesis 18, angel of the Lord comes down. 2 men come with him. We find out later they're Malachim. So he's always got, and there may have been more, we don't know, we just know that there's mentions 2. Okay?
Yeah.
So it mentions 2. Now, here's what's fascinating. So these are, so now if he comes down on Mount Sinai, then the implication is that angels must have come down on Mount Sinai too and administered the Torah with him. The intertestamental literature says as much and goes into great detail on this. Now, here's what's fascinating. The apostolic scriptures pick up on this and just say it like it's fact. They say, let's look at our examples here. So let's look at these examples here just a second. Let me find the text again here just a second. Oh, here, look at Acts 7:38. Somebody look at Acts 7:38, then somebody look at Galatians, because there's 2 in Galatians and there's 2 in Acts. There's actually a couple more, I think. But somebody read Acts 7:38 and also verse 53. And then somebody else look up Galatians. There's Galatians 3:19 and Galatians 4:9.
Acts 7:38. This is he who was in the assembly in the wilderness with the messenger who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the living words to give to us.
Verse 53. Verse 53.
53.
Yeah, as well. That's another one. Same chapter.
Yep, hang on, let's get here.
Somebody else read
Who
Galatians.
received the Torah as it was ordained by messengers, but did not watch over it.
Okay. And then somebody look at Galatians 3:19. What is Galatians 3:19?
Says, what purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of transgression till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator.
Okay, and then read Galatians 4:9.
4:9 says, but now, after you have known God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you turn again to the weak and beggarly elements to which you desire again to be in bondage?
Here's the elements of it now.
Yeah.
You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid for you, lest I have labored in vain.
It's gonna keep reading a little bit.
So this helps with Galatians as well.
Yes, it does.
14.
Is it 14 when you finally get to it? Go to 14.
In my trial, which was in my flesh, you did not despise or reject, but you received me as an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus.
Okay, yeah, that was it. But there's a couple other places. There's 1 or 2 other places in the apostolic scriptures where it says that the Torah was administered by angels. Okay, so there's a couple other places besides what he has listed here. So that's fascinating because if you read the Torah, like you're saying, there's nothing explicit that makes it clear where you go, okay, you can extrapolate to it. I see how they extrapolated to it. I see how they got to it. But you have to connect some dots. It doesn't just come automatically. Now, intertestamental period says we connected the dots. Apostolic scripture then says, yes, they connected the dots and got it right. And they just say it like, yeah, the angels were there. Yeah.
I think for them it was just normal. It was part of life. For
Yeah.
us, we're so far removed from it that it's like, wow, that really happened.
Right.
But it was like well known to them.
Right. By the intertestamental literature time, they're connecting these dots, and they're saying, okay, yeah, we got it connected. Now, some of the dots that the intertestamental literature connected, I kind of go, that's problematic. It bothers me. Other things, you kind of go, okay. You know, they connect it up, and you see it, and kind of go, all right. I can see how they got there. Some of them, I admit, for me, and maybe it's just my perception of it, and I don't, like Linda's saying, maybe for them it was like, duh, you know, okay, that's the way it is. But other parts of it, you kind of just go, I don't know how they got there, I don't know how they connected these dots. But, okay, well, here's another one of those. 1 Corinthians 10, we talked about this one. You know, there's water at the beginning of the journey, water at the end in the Tanakh. So when they start out on their 40-year wilderness journey, we have water from a rock. Toward the end, we have water from a rock. Intertestamental says the rock followed them. The rock followed them. You'd never get that from reading the Torah. Okay, intertestamental literature, 3 or 4 sources say, and this rock followed them. Paul picks up 1 Corinthians, and this rock, now he takes it even a step further. He says, this rock followed them, and this rock was Messiah. Okay. You know, I'm like the Aflac duck going, you know, all right. Now, I can connect that one up too. I get how they connected the dots, but you wouldn't have read it if I just gave you the text and said, read this. I don't think you would have ever deduced, oh, the rock followed them. Nor would you clearly have deduced, just from a straight reading of the text, without other text around it, would you have said, oh, the angels were there as well. You have to have a lot of more revelation, and then you start to go, okay, because of that I can piece this, and I can piece this, and then I can go, okay, now I can get it. And that's how they're doing it intertestamentally. They're connecting up these dots and going, oh, okay, all right. Then they connected them up. Now, sometimes the apostolic writers went, yeah, they connected it right, they got it right. Other times, there's other things that they came up with that they didn't tell us and didn't say, oh, we agree with that. So, I mean, it is what it is. You know? It is what it is. But I think it's good to understand this, because Colossians 2 has been one of those texts that people say, see right here, look at this. So right there, Sabbath, new moon, festivals, that's all stuff, that stuff's out. That's not what Paul's combating. So, I hope you go back, read through this again, study through this, because I think he's right to say, you know, Paul's talking about things that were man-made, that this is from a philosophy that's coming out of man's head, not out of the Tanakh. And you know, read through this again, because I think it's powerful.
Well, it's a pattern that is
Actually,
continued.
several times.
Yes. Yeah, it's a pattern that has continued. That
I mean, it's gotten to the point, I went to a wedding, this was years ago. I was best man at this wedding. It was in New York. And it was at St. John's University. So we're at the chapel there, and the priest comes up to me and says, he's asking me about my faith, and since I did not agree with the fact that I didn't think he could turn wine into the blood of Christ, and they believe that.
Oh yeah.
And the bread turns into his actual body. They have that power.
Right.
That I didn't buy that. It's a large wedding. I'm the only one not taking sacrament. Everybody else. Yeah. I'm the best man. Wasn't, I guess, the best you can get. But it was one of those things, I just went, no. And that's what I think, if you bring angels up, you're going to bring Yeshua down.
Right.
And if they can do it, we can do it.
Right. Well, not only that, but it had two effects. It brought Yeshua down, like you said, and made him common, and then ended up elevating us and saying, well, we can imitate and move ourselves to the heavenlies and imitate the angels.
Well, you take Mormonism, you become Elohim.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Once you get on that slope,
right.
right, you can go anywhere.
Right. So, It
Man-made.
just shows you how these philosophies, this is what Paul's dealing with in Colossians. He's dealing with a philosophy that has obviously gained some traction, and so he's having to say, hey, look, guys, it sounds good. I mean, think about this. Here's how the deception of it. Fasting. Is fasting a good thing? Sure. So let's fast. Okay. Abstinence from sex. I mean, is there some qualities, good things to that?
I don't know.
There's not much good to that.
I'm
I'm
drawing a blank.
Yeah, that's where you have to draw the line. That right there should have been the clue that this was
Something's wrong.
although
No ice cream?
I know, exactly.
although Paul does say in 1 Corinthians 7 that you can take a vow, a husband and wife, if they agree together, can take a vow to abstain for a period of time.
For prayer.
For prayer,
Yeah.
and for devotion to God, for that section of time.
For brief.
Okay, and it's not meant to be eternal. Okay, so
Hallelujah.
if the angels don't have physical relations, and the angels fast, and the angels worship around the throne of God, then you say, hey, let's synchronize with the angels and let's do what they do. Okay, that's this kind of and it sounds to some people you could go, yeah, okay. I mean, for and then what happens is somebody comes up with, again, it's man-made. They say we have figured out the liturgy of the angels. This is what they do around the throne of God. This is what they do as their liturgy around the throne of God. So we'll do it too. Where'd you come up with that? Well, somebody came up with it.
Yeah.
That's the man-made part as well. Okay. So now we have this sacred liturgy. We're going to all live like the angels. You can see how what this did was it said, look, it democratized the heavenly realm and said, it's all just about these angels. It's not really about Messiah. So it diminished his role and really elevated the angels as the means of imitating the angels.
Well, it's like praying to Mary.
Yeah. Hey, at least I can say this. I mean, again, on the hierarchy of way things go, I can make a much stronger case, at least, for wanting to be like the angels than I can for wanting to be like Mary. At least the angels are around the throne of God, and at least worshiping and all that. I mean, you can see how this has some appeal to it. It's not a human being, and these are actually ones that are around the throne of God all the time. And you can see how this had some traction for people because they said, yeah, angelic host, yeah, that's good, yeah, okay. So you can clearly see why this gained momentum and people were buying into it. This is why Paul has to address it and say, hey, they're coming up with all this philosophy and they're attaching it. Here's the other kicker. Think about this. You have fasting, abstinence.